Connected by Kim Karr. Narrated by Veronica Munch and Christian Fox. Prologue. I have visited this place many times, but today it's different. I'm alone. There are no comforting arms around me. My body trembles. Not from the cold, but from the realization that fate hasn't worked in my favor. A single tear slowly drips down my face as I look into the night and scream, "Why couldn't we just stay together?" As the wind moans in the distance, thunder crashes and lightning strikes. I stand here hoping the impending storm will carry me away and erase the shadow that looms over me. A slow, soothing rain falls from the blackened sky, but it provides no relief for my ravaged soul. A mist slowly rises into the night, and the cold air sends shivers down my spine. I huddle to the ground, feeling lost and alone. As my tears merge with the rain, they fall into the darkness. No one is here to see me. No one knows where to find me. Only the vultures notice me as they fly swiftly overhead, seeking shelter against the cold rain. I'm not looking for refuge in this place I now despise. But I have nowhere else to go. I have no hope. I have no future. Crazy, August, 1999. This was the best place on earth. Music roared through the speakers, electricity filled the air, and crowds of people rushed to find their seats. My father and I stopped quickly to purchase our concert t-shirts. Clutching our tickets tightly, we made our way through the crowd. The excitement around us was almost indescribable. We sat down, mesmerized by our surroundings. It was impossible to take everything in. Being so close to the stage was intoxicating. I was frozen with shock, and my eyes flickered through the rays of the spotlights as they made their way up the stairs. Bono encouraged thousands of fans to wave their hands and nod their heads. Eventually, I began to absorb my surroundings as U2 began to play Beautiful Day. Slipping into an almost hypnotic state, I closed my eyes and swayed to the pulse of the beat as the vibrations of the music penetrated my body. I remained in this state throughout most of the concert, just as I had many times before. Going to the Greek theater, or the Greek, was an experience like no other. It was the largest outdoor amphitheater in the area. Celebrities, unknown bands, known singers, groupies, and concert-goers gathered here from miles around, but they had all come for the same reason, to listen to the best music ever. My father was the general manager of the Greek. He loved music, mostly rock, from the 80s and 90s. He'd been going to concerts since he was 13 and always bought a t-shirt. To say that he had a few concert t-shirts was putting it mildly. He started working at the Greek at a young age and never left because he loved his job. He always knew the inside scoop about bands and lived for sharing his stories with me. I was even lucky enough to have one of the Wear Purple ticket stubs from Prince's sold-out Purple Rain concert in my possession. But there is one concert that will forever hold a place in my heart. It was the Nirvana benefit concert for Bosnian rape victims. They opened with Rape Me, and the emotion in that song made me fall even more in love with music than I already had. After I left the concert that night, the Greek was not only my father's favorite place to be, but mine too. My mom was not into music. She preferred clothes to concerts. She taught me to sew, and together we made a quilt with the concert t-shirts I outgrew. Between my father and me, we collected over 200 pieces of music history. Trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up was always hard. I was torn between my father's love for music, my mother's love for fashion, and my love for photography. I thought maybe I'd have a music career or go to the New York School of Fashion and Design like my mother had. But whichever career path I chose needed to provide me with the freedom to take pictures. Chapter 1. Out of my head. October 2006. Walking through the Greek-lettered doors of Kappa Sigma, I felt like I'd just stepped onto a movie set. It was Halloween. Everyone was wearing costumes, holding red solo cups, and dancing. Well, not everyone. I looked twice to be certain, but sure as shit, there was a large, dark blue ice luge in the center of the living room. The guy at the bottom of the channel was my boyfriend, Ben. And the person in line behind him was my best friend, Ari. I didn't go to a lot of fraternity parties, and looking at the two of them now, I knew why. Frowning at the two drunken idiots on the receiving end of the ice luge, I headed toward the kitchen to grab a beer. As I crossed back into the living room, I saw Ben sucking on a lime and squinting his eyes with his nose scrunched as he moved his head from side to side. While shaking my head, I passed by a couple playing beer pong and laughed. Clearly, she'd had a few too many drinks. Noticing me, Ben shot a wicked smirk in my direction and crooked his index finger, gesturing me toward him. He strode a few steps closer, his gaze holding mine as the crowd cleared the way. Standing face to face, I could see that his forget-me-not blue eyes were slightly hooded, allowing me only a glimpse of his dilated pupils. But his sly grin was still present, meaning he was in a somewhat coherent state of mind. Raising an eyebrow, I pointed to the dark blue ice sculpture. "Hey, how many times did you hit that?" Feigning confusion, he raised his hands, palms up. "Not sure," he said as he cocked his head to one side while shrugging his shoulders. Ben took the cup out of my hand and set it on the table beside us. He snaked his arms around my waist and pulled me to him. "Hey, doll, what took so long?" he asked as he placed his strong hands on my behind. Wrapping my arms around his neck, I rested my forehead on his chin and let out a slow sigh. Photo shoot took longer than expected. Drake had a meltdown when the model's outfits weren't the shade of purple he'd asked for. Ben groaned and dipped his head to kiss me. "Drake's a fucking pansy ass. You better hope you find a new internship for next semester because he's really starting to piss me off." Flinching a little at his words, I leaned back to place my hands on his hard chest before looking into his slightly glazed eyes. "Ben, promise me you'll stay away from him." "Will do. Promise, doll." He chuckled, the smell of alcohol strong on his breath. I sighed and ran my hands up to his hair, combing my fingers through it. Looking at me with concern, he whispered, "You okay?" "Of course, the wrong color purple isn't really the end of the world." He studied me and hesitated before responding. "Doll, you know that's not what I mean." I stiffened. I knew what he meant, but I didn't want to talk about the anniversary of my parents' death. "Ben, I'm cool. Let's have a good time," I muttered. I broke our embrace, grabbed my beer, and looked around the room for Ari. Ben nodded, his sly grin returning while he watched me chug the entire contents of the solo cup before chewing on the ice cubes. Beckoning me to the center of the room, he pointed to the luge. "This way, gorgeous." Having refilled our drinks, we stood at the liquor-filled ice dispenser. The party was in full swing, and I watched Ben hit the luge yet again. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I glanced around at the crowd and pushed through the chaos. There were wall-to-wall people in every room. I stumbled into a tall guy with red hair, and I knew he was beyond drunk when he tried to kiss me. I shoved him and giggled when he tripped over his own feet and fell on his ass. I continued making my way to the stairs. They were filled with students drinking, making out, or doing way more than I ever needed to see. The room smelled like alcohol mixed with sweat, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't get out of there soon enough. Weaving around the crowd on the stairs, I was thankful to finally make it to the bathroom. After splashing my face with water, I headed to Ben's room for a much-needed mental break. This particular day was the hardest one of the year for me, but being around friends always seemed to help me through it. As I headed toward his bed, I noticed the tickets he had given me this morning. I knew he meant well by buying us Greek tickets to see one of my favorite bands, Maroon 5. He thought he would brighten an otherwise dark day. But I couldn't go back there. Sighing, I threw myself on the bed. Yes, he meant well, and he really wanted to be the one to take me there, but he knew I would never go back. I've told him this. The U2 performance was the last concert I went to with my family before my mother, my aunt, and my father died in a small plane crash coming home from Mexico. I'm not sure how long I stayed in his room thinking about my parents until I finally decided to rejoin the party. I first stopped in the kitchen to grab a third beer, and then headed back into the living room. All the lights had been turned off, and orange candles glowed everywhere as the sound of haunting music filled the room. I felt a strong arm wrap around my waist, and Ben nibble on my ear. "Where you been, doll?" "Just grabbing a beer," I answered, holding my solo cup in the air and twisting around in his arms. Loud screams pulled my attention back to the ice luge where Ari was jumping up and down, grabbing her throat and squealing in pain. Motioning my head toward her, I set my cup down on the banister. What's she drinking? Clutching his arms tighter around my hips, he pulled me closer. As he slipped his long fingers inside the waistband of my black leggings, he fingered the lace of my panties and whispered in my ear, "Don't know." Then he placed one of his legs between mine and asked, "Want some?" I shook my head no, but was nearly panting as I responded. "I promised Ari I'd go with her to the bar and listen to some new band. One of us should stay somewhat lucid, at least until we get there." He trailed his hands across the top of my panties. The fingertips of his one hand grazed from my backside across to my hip bone. Before I knew what was happening, his fingers started drifting down into the front of my pants. "I didn't mean the luge," he said coyly, before plunging his tongue into my ear and grinding his hips into mine. I pulled back from him and removed his hands from inside my leggings. I needed to stop this very public display of affection before I couldn't. I brushed his blonde hair away from his seductive blue eyes and asked, "You coming?" Grinning fiendishly, he answered, "I hope to be soon, gorgeous." I laughed and shook my head. "Ben Covington, you're impossible." I reached around his neck and tugged his head down to mine, connecting my mouth to his. Ben pulled his soft lips from mine and groaned in my ear. "My room now. I need to fuck you." I leaned back and stared at his incredibly irresistible grin. Summoning all of my willpower, I tried to decide what to do. Before I could respond, Ari tugged my ponytail. She swayed slightly and slurred. "There you are, girlfriend. You ready?" Separating myself from him, I shrugged my shoulders and mouthed, "Sorry, rain check?" He exhaled and muttered under his breath to Ari, "Nice fucking timing." Ari, being Ari, thumped him in the forehead. "Watch the language, asshole," she quipped as she reached for my arm. Leaning back toward Ben, I gave him a swift kiss. With Ari forcefully tugging me toward the door, I managed to say, "Meet you back here later," walking backward and giggling. I blew Ben a kiss and waved goodbye. Rocking back on his heels, he stood with both hands in his pockets while biting his lip and shaking his head at me. The cool night helped to settle the heat Ben had ignited. Sounds of Halloween echoed from every direction as we walked down Fraternity Row. We only took a taxi part of the way, then we walked the rest. Once we got out of the taxi, I glanced at Ari, or more specifically, at her devil costume. She must have been plastered when she got ready, because it wasn't something I could have ever imagined her wearing. A very short red sequin dress, a devil tail, high heels, and all the accessories to match. It could barely pass as an acceptable red light district ensemble, let alone a Halloween costume. As we walked toward the bar, I grabbed a stumbling Ari by the arm before she landed on her ass. "Have a nice trip?" I laughed, knowing full well she didn't like to be made fun of, but not really caring. Ari shrugged, pulling her beautiful wavy blonde hair back and fastening it with the clip she had been fishing out of her purse when she missed her step. "Be nice," she quipped, stopping me so she could readjust her shoe. "At least you can't call me a nonconformist." I never told Ari that Halloween was the anniversary of my parents' death. Ben was the only one who knew I never wanted to camouflage my feelings with a costume. I sighed and wrapped my arm around her shoulder and put on my very best Vincent Price voice from Thriller. "You know I never conform. It's against my religion." We continued walking, Ari in red high-heel Vixen pumps, me in black Converse sneakers, and she tripped again, leaving her shoe behind her. "Ari, really, I think your outfit could have done without those shoes. They're too big, you dumbass." I turned around and picked up her shoe. "What size are these?" I asked, squinting to see inside. "Don't worry about it. It's not like you'd ever wear them anyway. Miss, I always have to wear comfortable shoes. Is the only pair of red shoes left, and one size too big is hardly an issue when they match your outfit perfectly," she announced, yanking the shoe out of my hand. "You know it's all about the look. I'd sacrifice comfort for style any day." She cleared her throat while looking down at my shoes. Shaking my head at her, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Whatever. I walked a little slower so she could keep her shoes on. Ari said in a much sweeter voice, "Thanks for taking me out. Now come on, let's get moving and have some fun. It's girls' night out after all, and I have a broken heart to mend." I gave her a little smile as I squeezed her arm. "Sweetheart, I think you started the mending process hours ago." Ari shuffled down the sidewalk to hold her shoes in place, and I knew this was going to be an interesting night. Ari, my best friend since freshman year, broke up with her boyfriends like I changed the flavor of my coffee creamer. Often. Ari was type A, even though you would never have known it from her drunken state. She strove for perfection, not just with herself, but with her boyfriends. Which explains why she broke up with her last boyfriend yesterday. Tonight, she was looking forward to new options, and I was looking forward to hearing a new band. Chapter 2. Next Lifetime. We walked through the open door to the University of Southern California campus bar, and Ari pulled her tail up. "At least they aren't playing that Halloween crap in here," she yelled a little too loudly. As my ears adjusted, I heard a velvety soft voice singing an unfamiliar yet captivating song. Ari stopped to put her devil horns on, and I glanced around the large room, recognizing a lot of students, while trying to get a look at the band. I shouted directly into her ear, "They sound really good. Have you heard them before?" She was on her toes, trying to see over the crowd. I laughed at how short she was until her pointy devil horn hit me in the eye. "No, but I love their sound," she responded, still trying to see the stage and almost falling over. I had been coming here for the last 3 years and couldn't ever remember it being so crowded. I could barely see the long wooden bar to my right, and with the mass of bodies bumping and grinding on the dance floor, I couldn't even catch a glimpse of the stage. "Do you know their name?" I asked Ari. "I think they're called the Wild Ones," she hiccuped and laughed. She winked at me as she started to dance her way toward some friends on the dance floor, and yelled over her shoulder, "By the way, I love them. Great name and an even greater sound." "I'll get drinks and meet you out there in a bit," I said to no one since she was already gone. When the bartender acknowledged me, I ordered 2 beers, one with ice and one without, and tacked on 2 shots to help Ari drown her misery. The live music stopped and typical Halloween songs were blasted through the speakers. I turned my back to the bar and scanned the crowd for Ari. You would think she would be easy to spot in her red sequin devil costume. She said she was out for vengeance, and if her outfit was any indication, she would be vindicated. I didn't see her anywhere, but I did spot an attractive guy. He was still too far away for me to zero in on any specific feature, but everything about him drew my attention. I watched how he moved. His confidence captivated me. He seemed relaxed, like he knew exactly where he was going. And as he headed in my direction, I became mesmerized. Biting my bottom lip, I was unable to focus on anything but him. My head was still a little foggy from the 3 beers I'd consumed earlier, and I was clearly not thinking straight when I made eye contact with him, and then slowly studied his body from head to toe. As the distance between us narrowed, I could see that he was alarmingly attractive. Long, lean, and muscular, but not bulky. He wore a black beanie hat with his light brown hair sticking out. When I looked into his eyes, they undid me. Although I couldn't see their color, I could feel their intensity. I almost feared that if I looked into them for too long, I might never walk away. His eyes aside, the words handsome and gorgeous weren't strong enough adjectives to describe this man. My mind wandered to where it shouldn't. Knowing better than to compare this guy to my boyfriend, I did it anyway. I felt incredibly guilty, but I couldn't help myself. Ben was all surfer. He was attractive, hot, and sexy, with an ego to match. This guy was equally as attractive, hot, and sexy. But there was something else. Something more. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Easing his way through the crowd, he removed his beanie and ran his hands through his hair. When our eyes connected, it felt like minutes, but only seconds passed. Suddenly, I felt an electric pull forcing me to keep looking at him. Everything I felt indicated he was dangerous. I knew I should look away, walk away, but I didn't. I couldn't. He was just too alluring. He was finally close enough that I could tell his gleaming eyes were green. I was instantly drawn to his smile. It wasn't a full smile, more like a half grin emphasizing his dimples. His skin was smooth, with no facial hair, and that made me weak in the knees. His full lips were begging for a kiss. I'd never looked at a guy like this before, not even Ben. So why was I eyeing him this way, and why was I unable to avert my gaze? Aside from his overall sex appeal, his clothing made him even more irresistible. He wore faded jeans, a black Foreigner concert t-shirt, and black work boots. I had to laugh a little when I saw the concert t-shirt, because I was wearing one too, my dad's U2 shirt knotted on the side, hanging off my shoulder. Having made his way through the crowd much better than I had, he was now standing in front of me. His face was breathtaking. He had a strong chin, a small straight nose, perfectly shaped eyebrows, and long eyelashes. He was a vision of utter perfection, and I couldn't help but smile. The bar was crowded, and there was no room on either side of me. Putting both hands in his pockets, he smiled back at me. Then, running his tongue over his bottom lip, he asked in a low, sexy voice, "Were you staring at me?" I pouted my lips and rolled my eyes. I took a deep breath as I straightened my shoulders and placed my hands on my hips. No, I was just looking for my friend while I waited on my drinks. You just happened to be in my line of vision. He chuckled a little, then said, "That look was hot." I huffed out a breath and tried not to laugh. Did he really just say that? When the bartender brought my order and set it in front of me, my phone started ringing in my pocket, but I ignored it as I continued to stare at him. "Why would you think I was looking at you anyway?" As the person beside me settled her tab and walked away, he moved to fill the empty space and tossed his beanie next to my drink. His proximity caused my pulse to race and my heart to pound faster. Leaning sideways, he rested his hip against the bar. With his eyes still locked on mine, he answered, "Because I was staring at you. hoping you were staring back. I looked directly into those powerful green eyes, so full of intensity, and I instantly lost my train of thought. With the electric pull only growing stronger between us, I feared I wasn't going to be able to get out of this encounter unscathed. He dragged his teeth across his bottom lip, and his eyes scanned my body. The expression on his face told me he wanted to do more than just talk. I wanted to do more as well. A moment of comfortable silence passed before he cocked his head to the side in the most adorable way and grinned. With all this talk about who was staring at whom, I think we forgot the basics. I'm River, he said as he extended his hand with the most devilish grin on his face. Feeling bewitched by him, I put my hand out to shake his, but quickly pulled it away. Unfortunately, I also bumped into the person standing next to me and accidentally spilled his beer. He gave me a dirty look and swore under his breath. River's grin quickly turned into a frown, and he gently moved me away. In a clipped tone, he apologized. Sorry, man, just an accident, but let me buy you another. The now drinkless man with a wet shirt looked at him and nodded. River pulled out his wallet and handed him a 10. Buy 2. The man took the money and walked away, muttering something under his breath. River immediately returned his attention to me, and I bit the corner of my lower lip and smiled at him. There we were, standing face to face, with only a few drinks separating us. Sliding one of the beers toward him, I took a sip of my own, even though the ice had melted. Thank you. That guy sure as shit wasn't happy with me. In fact, he kind of acted like an asshole. Taking a sip of his drink, he started to laugh, almost spitting it out. Skimming his finger over my bare shoulder, his eyes locked on mine. You're more than welcome. Quivering from his touch and intense gaze, I took a step back, fearful of where this might lead. Moving forward, he traced my last step. He was not going to let the distance widen between us. He stared intently into my eyes. Now, where were we? Do we need to start over? He waited for my response as he watched me swallow my drink. I pulled my lower lip to the side with my teeth and smiled playfully. We were introducing ourselves. Okay, so let's try again. I'm River, and you are? I'm not sure you need to know that information right now. I'm kind of thinking you might be a stalker. His eyes widened as he laughed. You're not serious, are you, beautiful girl? Unable to control my own laughter, I simply said, maybe I am. But my laughter subsided when I registered the sweet name he'd called me. Leaning toward me, he was close enough that I could inhale his fresh scent. It was a soapy, just out of the shower smell. What? If you're not going to tell me your name, then I get to call you whatever I want. Averting my eyes from his gaze, I looked down. After taking another sip of his beer, he set the mug down. He hooked my chin with his finger and tilted my head up toward him. His touch seared my skin and left it tingling. He stared at me with his intense green eyes and chuckled. Can we talk about you thinking I'm a Jack the Ripper type? I just want you to know I'm definitely not. In fact, I think it's safe to say you were staring at me first. But in no way do I think you're a stalker. My mouth dropped open. I was unsure of what to say. I knew he was right. I had stared first. So we can get past this. Let's just say I was staring first. Not that it really matters. We were looking into each other's eyes as the bartender passed me my bill. When I turned to pay for my drinks, our connection was broken. Handing my money to the bartender, I thanked him and told him to keep the change. This distraction gave me some time to think about how to handle this potentially dangerous situation. I watched River as he ordered 2 more beers and realized I had to work out my conflicted feelings. I pushed my guilt aside and handed him one of the shots. Cheers. "It's a beautiful day," he replied before shooting back the shot. I tried not to show how turned on I was that he had just quoted lyrics from one of my favorite songs. Setting his shot glass down, he put his hand in his pocket. "So, does this mean you forgive me?" His voice was strong but soft, and made him even more tempting. I found myself thinking that he was not only adorable, but unlike anyone I had ever encountered before. I knew I shouldn't be doing this. I had a boyfriend that I loved waiting for me. I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Forgive you?" "Forgive you for what?" I was having a hard time concentrating on the conversation, and honestly had no idea what the apology was for. He shifted on his feet. "You know what? Never mind," he muttered in my ear. His warm breath brushed my neck, and I wanted to feel it everywhere. Looking me up and down, he changed the subject. "What, no costume?" Continuing our dangerous flirtation, I glanced down, motioning with my hands from head to toe. "How do you know this isn't my costume?" While tugging on my t-shirt and pulling me a little closer, he seductively whispered, "If that's your costume, you're definitely taking first place in the contest, because it's the sexiest one I've ever seen." We were silent for a minute. Not even our heavy breathing could be heard. The noise from the bar and the crowd around us had quieted, but his words, his touch, they inflamed me, excited me, and sent fire through my veins. "Where'd you get this anyway?" he asked, tugging at the knot on my shirt, pulling me closer. It felt like the room was spinning, and I wasn't sure if it was him, the alcohol, or the fact that he had just asked me a question I didn't want to answer. "My dad managed the Greek and was a collector of concert t-shirts," I said, trying to push back the emotions welling up inside me. He seemed to understand my hesitation before nodding, clearing his throat, and once again changed the subject. "So, have you ever seen Foreigner play?" he asked, now pointing to his own shirt and grinning. As I looked at the bold white letters across his chest, I pushed aside my sadness and refocused on our conversation. We were just two people who had a lot in common, or at least that was what I wanted to think. When our drinks were gone, he ordered another round. As I finished the shot, I accidentally slammed the glass on the bar, and the bartender glowered at me. "Sorry," I mouthed. River reached out and grabbed a strand of hair that had come loose from my ponytail. He very slowly tucked it behind my ear, sending shivers down my spine. Circling his index finger around my ear, he lightly tugged on my lobe. He sparked a fire in me that never before existed. Gulping the drink I didn't need to be drinking, I hoped to extinguish the flame. I hoped no one had seen him touch me that way. Ben would be fucking furious. He was ridiculously jealous. We had many arguments about other men, all unjustified. At least, until now. As the strobe light started to flicker and I leaned my hip against the bar for support, he put his hand on my waist and turned me so my back was against the bar. I wondered if he noticed me almost lose my balance from the flashing lights and drunkenness. Moving to stand directly in front of me, he put his hands on either side of me and pressed his palms into the bar. He was enveloping me, but I didn't feel trapped. I didn't know what I felt, but I knew my heart was pounding out of my chest, my stomach was doing flips, and I became lightheaded as goosebumps emerged on my skin. I thought he was going to kiss me as he stared intently into my eyes. I closed my eyes, preparing for it, but I felt him abruptly pull away. Immediately I heard a high-pitched voice squeal, "River, don't forget we're leaving right after the show!" And before I could catch a glimpse of the girl, she bounced away. Smirking at me, he said, "My little sister has the worst timing." I was going to respond when I heard a drum roll echo through the bar. Glancing around, I tried to figure out what it was for. Amused, he rolled his eyes before looking at the stage, and then back to me. "That would be for me," He laughed, leaning in so we were face to face. "They want me back on stage. I've got to go unless you'd rather I stay, and we finish what we started, because that certainly would be way more fun." I really hadn't heard anything he said, but everything seemed to finally make sense. He was the voice I heard when I came into the bar. He was so charming, so captivating, and so aware of me. I was pretty sure I was drunk because I was feeling things I should not have been feeling. As I stared into his powerful green eyes, I knew I should have been trying to escape them. Before I could say anything in response, he moved his head slightly back, lifted my hand, and slowly kissed it. Then he leaned into me and whispered in my ear, "Guess not. Not yet, anyway." My hand was on fire, my ear scorched. That same drum roll rumbled through the sound system again, and he quickly turned his head back to look at me. "I got a jet." He was still holding my hand as he looked straight into my eyes. "You'll wait for me until after the show." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And then motioning between us, he added, "Because this isn't finished." At that moment, I realized that what had started as harmless flirting had turned into a situation that had gotten way too dangerous. He placed his hands back on the bar and waited for a response. Since he hadn't asked a question that I wanted to answer, I just smiled and said, "If you're in the band, you'd better go. You shouldn't leave your fans waiting." He gave me one last heart-stopping grin and then leaned in and kissed me. My body reacted strangely. A rush of something I couldn't identify surged through me. At first he only lightly touched my lips with his, then for a few short seconds he pressed a little harder before pulling away. I didn't kiss him back, but felt lightheaded. "I hope you've become a fan," he said, winking at me before grabbing his hat. Then he turned and walked away. I brought my fingers up to my lips and watched as his silhouette disappeared through the crowd. I became vaguely aware that Superstition was playing, but my mind was focused on him. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the thoughts that shouldn't be there. I knew I had to leave, or I would end up doing something I would regret. I loved Ben, and Ben would fucking kill River just for looking at me the way he did. And then there was the kiss. Yes, Ben would certainly kill him. Knowing these things, I wondered why I hadn't walked away in the first place. For a moment there, I felt as though I believed in love at first sight, which I didn't. And how could love at first sight even exist when you were already in love with someone else? I didn't want to keep thinking about what happened because I was confused as hell. And I knew the meaning of it all wasn't what I wanted it to be. I smiled about our encounter. He definitely was not a stalker. He was adorably charming and utterly charismatic. A guy who had a simple ease about him that I really liked. And a guy I didn't ever need to see again. This I knew for certain. With thoughts of River swirling through my head, I made my way through the crowd to the dance floor, where I found Ari with some kind of pink drink in her hand. "We have to leave. Now!" I shouted at her while pulling her off the dance floor. "What? Why? Are you sick?" she asked, struggling for words. Then she turned and pointed to the stage. "Because if you're not, I want to see that hot guy sing first." I turned to see where she was pointing, and sure enough, it was him, River. I then realized I'd never even told him my name. Pulling Ari through the crowd under protest, I heard the audience chanting, "River Wild, River Wild." I glanced up to the stage just in time to see him grab the microphone. Before the live music started, we exited through the door, and Ari started yelling obscenities at me. As we walked away, I found myself thinking I had just had the most magical encounter, and might never be the same because of it. Chapter 3. It's Not My Time. March 2010. I looked in the mirror, trying to decide whether or not the pearl necklace would take the edge away from my deep V-neck black cocktail dress. The bathroom counter was covered in different necklaces. Our laundry was in a heap on the hamper, and dirty towels were thrown all over the floor. I smiled when I glanced up and saw Ben's reflection in the mirror. He was leaning with his shoulder on the bathroom doorframe, a wicked grin on his face, and a wild glimmer in his piercing blue eyes. "Pearls or no pearls?" I asked as I watched him come toward me. I had known him since I was 5 years old, but for some reason the way he looked at me then left me breathless. Ben wrapped his tan arms around my waist and started to kiss my neck. I could feel the soft, warm skin of his freshly shaven face. "Doll, I'd prefer nothing at all, to be perfectly honest," he muttered while he began to unzip my dress. "Hey, we're going to be late," I said. "L.A. is at least an hour drive." I tried unsuccessfully to wiggle out of the one arm he still had around my waist as he continued to unzip my dress with the other. Watching Ben in the mirror, I saw him bite his lip as he let out a little groan. "Well, it's my party, and I can be late if I want to," he whispered in my ear, then resumed kissing my neck. He looked incredibly hot in his black tuxedo, slicked back hair, and clean-shaven face. I felt a slight stirring through my body, which prevented me from wriggling out of his arm. Instead, I turned around to look at him. I was so proud of how successful Ben had become in this short time. He landed a job at the Los Angeles Times right out of college and proved his ability in only a few short years. Even though the commute from Laguna was tedious, he didn't mind doing it, especially since he wasn't required to go into the office every day. Now my fiancé was going to be receiving California's Journalist of the Year award at a prestigious dinner in L.A. for his brilliant work in underground crime investigation. I knew I wasn't the only one full of excitement, even if I was the only one who showed it. Ben's lack of enthusiasm wasn't like him. In fact, he hadn't been acting like himself all week, and I had been trying to figure out what was going on. I wasn't sure if I should be concerned or touched by his behavior. He had been sweeter than he usually was. He sent me flowers. He bought me candy. He spent every night at home with me. He'd even shown up at my office every day to take me to lunch. Ben was never the type of boyfriend to dote. He wasn't a flowers and chocolates kind of guy, and I wasn't the kind of girl who needed that. I liked my independence, and so did he. He had always taken care of me and loved me in his own way, but never, in all our years together, had he done those types of things. Once before, he came close to acting like a doting boyfriend, but technically he wasn't my boyfriend at the time. The event leading up to our breakup will forever be ingrained in my mind. I remember clearly the day I popped into Ben's room at his frat house. It was the end of the first semester of our senior year at USC. I stopped by to tell him I'd finally gotten the internship I really wanted at Sound Music. I was so happy that I wasn't going to have to intern for Drake anymore, and I knew Ben would be thrilled. He wasn't in his room when I got there, so I sat down at his desk to send his sister Serena a quick email to share my news with her. I knew she'd be excited for me. I pressed the space bar on his computer, and his email account was already open, so I figured I'd just type my quick note from there. Instead of hitting compose, I accidentally clicked on the trash folder and noticed the date October 31st straight away. As my eyes scanned the screen, the words reply to, spell, later tonight, green eyes, touch, copper, and your apartment were all that registered before he came over and quickly right-clicked, hitting the delete button. He startled me. I hadn't heard him walk into the room. I hadn't had a chance to read the whole thing, but I knew he must have been hiding something. Was he really making plans with another girl? Plans that were not in the least bit platonic? He admitted to emailing this girl, but assured me nothing sexual had actually happened. In the end, he confessed that their relationship was inappropriate. He swore he had ended it, and I'm sure he had, but I couldn't trust him, so we broke up. Over the next 3 months, he tried so hard to convince me to forgive him. He left notes on my car, flowers at my door, messages with profuse apologies, text messages confessing his love. He showed up anywhere he knew I would be, and even bought me a silver-plated coffee cup that said, "To brighten up your mornings," along the side. It was a long, hard 3-month separation. I never realized just how much I would actually miss him, but I did. A lot. So I decided to trust him and move past his dishonesty. I really did love him, and I knew he loved me. Perhaps I also felt a little guilty about my own encounter with a certain singer. So yes, the doting alarmed me. Not that I didn't appreciate his kind gestures, but it made me think something was wrong. Was there something not right in our relationship? It had had its share of ups and downs. Maybe this behavior was just one of the ups. Or maybe it had something to do with wanting to get married, since we had never talked about setting a wedding date. The one thing I was sure about was our love and commitment to each other. We had grown up together. We had been boyfriend and girlfriend since we were 16, and we had been engaged for 2 years. We may have disagreed on many things and argued more than I preferred, but we always fell back on our commitment, especially since the root of most of our disagreements stemmed from something I could not fix. Our arguments were usually the result of Ben's jealousy. Ben would be jealous if another man so much as looked at me, which was ironic because Ben was always very flirtatious. He was also self-centered. This trait was more a function of who he was, a man with drive, determined to get ahead, although sometimes I wondered at what cost. Shaking my head, I had no idea what was going on with Ben. However, I made an effort to push aside the disconcerting thoughts and just embrace the moment. "Today is your big day," I said while looking into his eyes. I gave him a large, happy smile. Full of pride, I diverted my eyes from his and said, "And your party or not, it would be rude for the main speaker to be late." I kissed him on the lips to help soften my words. "Now zip my dress back up and tell me what you think." Ben flashed me a dangerous smile, but didn't move. "You can be very bossy. I think you look fucking gorgeous," he snickered, finally turning me back around to zip up my dress. I looked at him in the mirror and saw him still grinning at me. "No, the pearls, silly. Should I wear them or not?" I asked while holding them up to my neck again. Ben's smile faded a little as he took the pearls from my hands. "No pearls. They remind me of your grandma. Not that I didn't love your Grammy, but I love you in a totally different way. I don't want Grammy images popping up in my head while I'm fucking you." He turned me back around and kissed me right on the chest where the pearl necklace would have sat. Then he ran his hand up under my dress. I shivered, and he smiled. I laughed and said, "Stop it, Ben Covington. You can't do that after talking about Grammy. It just seems wrong." I moved aside and started to leave the bathroom to put on my shoes. I tripped over a towel on my way out and said, "Maybe you could try cleaning up after yourself a little." But he knew I was kidding, since I was much messier. "I love you, you know," Ben said while he followed me out of the bathroom. As I sat on the bed, still unmade from our afternoon romp, I slipped on one of my shoes before pulling my leg up onto the bed. "I know, and I love you too." Once again I wondered, why the onslaught of affection? Ben stood over me to help fasten the ankle strap on my left shoe. I noticed his facial expression change again, turning a bit more serious. "No, Dahlia, I really, really love you. Never forget it, no matter what." "Dahlia, you never call me that," I said as I wriggled my foot and ran it up his stomach, trying to lighten the mood. Ben smirked, set my foot down, and walked over to his dresser. I was at a loss for words as he reached into one of the drawers and pulled out a Cartier box. Walking back to the bed, he handed me the box and said, "I bought this for you because it says what I never seem to be able to say." Surprised by the lavish box, I looked at it for a few seconds before opening it. Inside was a stunning white gold and diamond bracelet. It had 4 hearts engraved around the edge. I knew it well because I had written a paper about that piece of jewelry for one of my style classes in college. The bracelet was created by Cartier in the 1970s and designed to be locked firmly onto a loved one's wrist by the giver with the aid of a golden screwdriver that the giver keeps. Looking up at him, my eyes started to fill with tears, and without words I put my hand out for him to fasten the bracelet around my wrist. Staring at the beautiful piece, I was overcome by emotion, but tried not to cry. "I love it," I said while swallowing hard. He leaned down and kissed me softly on the lips. I gazed at him and noticed his eyes were slightly weepy, and his forehead was creased. I kept watching him as he turned around and walked toward what used to be my mother's hope chest. It was old, and the creamy white paint was almost completely peeled off. Ben's strides were slow and deliberate. This display of emotion was unusual. I had never seen him that overcome, not even when he asked me to marry him. It just wasn't his nature. Turning the key that I always left in the keyhole, he opened the lid to the chest and said, "I don't see why you'd ever have to take off the bracelet, but just in case, I'll put this," he held the screwdriver up in the air, "in here. So you know where to find it, okay?" He winked at me while pointing to the chest. I knew he never liked how unorganized I was, but he knew I could always find anything of importance in that chest. I watched as Ben carefully looked for a place to put the screwdriver. He decided on a small square, located in the red velvet-covered tray that was hinged to the lid. From the bed I could see all the items that were meaningful to me. I smiled when I saw my dolls, yearbooks, diplomas, and various pictures. I finished putting on my other shoe, stood up, and walked behind him. I wrapped my arms around his waist and squeezed. He grabbed my arms and squeezed back for a few seconds before placing his hands on the lid. As he closed it, I saw Malibu Ken lying on top of all the other items, and my mind wandered back to the first time we had sex. We were out surfing at our favorite spot, miles away from other people and cars. The swells were small, so the surf was unburdened. It started to rain, but we continued to ride the most perfect waves. When the rain fell harder, we swam to shore, boards attached to our legs, and it was almost pouring when we made a run for the car. Ben carried both of our boards while I carried all the other gear. A crack of thunder took him by surprise and made him fall with the two boards toppling down. I stopped to help him, throwing all the gear I was carrying to the ground. He just looked at me and laughed. "Fuck it." He put both boards together in the sand to make a teepee. We were sitting under it, watching the rain hit the waves like sheets of glass shattering on the ground, when Ben leaned in and kissed me. We had kissed so many times before, but never like that. I pulled away at first, not sure where we were headed. I'd gone on the pill a couple months before in anticipation of having sex for the first time, and as the tide creeped up, I knew the time was upon us. I knew the time was right. Ben brought my lips back to his and thrust his tongue to meet mine. I closed my eyes, craving his touch. I could smell the salt from the ocean on his warm skin and taste it on his tongue. He pulled me as close as he could, and when we stopped kissing, I opened my eyes. We were both breathing heavily, almost panting as the drumming of the rain continued. He gazed at me with his lips slightly parted. I pressed my fingers against his lips, and he kissed them. Then I ran my fingers down his bare chest and across his well-defined stomach. I heard a slight intake of breath, and with hooded eyes he kissed my lips again, this time a little harder. As his tongue entwined with mine, he slipped his hand inside my bikini top, rubbing circles around my nipple with his thumb. The wind picked up, blowing my hair across our faces. Moaning into his mouth and straddling his lap, I felt his erection as I ground my hips into his. I ran my hands through his wet hair and down his bare back, hard enough that I could feel the grit of the sand rubbing against his skin. Kissing his way down my throat, Ben whispered, "I love you, doll," before moving his hand behind my neck and tugging the string that held my bikini top in place. My head fell back as he lightly kissed each of my now fully exposed nipples. I arched my back as his kisses turned into sucks and licks, sending a jolt of pleasure through my core and a shiver down my spine. I could feel his smile against my skin as I whimpered, "I love you too." Flashes of lightning lit the sky off in the distance, but the real spark was right here on the beach. As I reached down, pressing my hands against the outside of Ben's board shorts, he moved his hands to the inside of my knees and spread my legs open wider. After outlining his erection with my fingers, I hooked my hands in the elastic of his shorts, wanting to lose the wet barrier between us. As my hands descended, Ben pulled away. "I want you. Now." "I want you too," I responded as I leaned back from him so I could see his face, leaving my hands where they were. As the ominous storm assaulted the beach, we continued to explore each other's bodies. When we were both panting uncontrollably, he stood up and reached for my hand, pulling me up out of our shelter and into the pouring rain. "Come on, let's go. I'll come back and get our shit later," he managed to say while pulling me close enough so that I could feel the raindrops from his body mix with mine. We stood there touching and kissing as he pulled me into his hardness, running his fingers inside the back of my bikini bottom. Pulling away, I looked around the deserted beach. "Let's stay here." Ben didn't need any more convincing as he pulled me back under our surfboard teepee and we had sex for the first time. I remembered looking at him that day so long ago, with his blonde hair and perpetual tan. When we stood there in the rain, about to take our relationship to the next step, I thought he looked more and more like my Malibu Ken doll. Ever since then, I called him Malibu Ken, or Ken for short. I remember he reacted by saying, "Shit, doll, people are going to think I play with Barbies." Then, with a wicked grin, he continued, "But that's okay, as long as you're my Barbie." He knew I was. That night, before he closed the chest, I pulled out my Malibu Ken and set him on my dresser. When he saw it, he asked with an amused look, "Barbie belonged to Ken, right?" I nodded. "It's cool then." I thought about how he tolerated my nickname for him over the years, even though he never really liked it. He just knew my Barbie dolls were a lifeline to my lost childhood. They photographed well, they let me style them, and they reminded me of happier times. Ben suddenly shut the lid and the memory dissipated. Blinking my eyes, I returned to the present as he turned and hugged me tightly. I don't remember the last time we hugged like that, and again I felt a bit alarmed until he looked me in the eyes and said in the softest whisper, "Please, doll, I want to fuck you, make love to you, before we go." With all the emotion and love I felt for him, I really didn't care how late we were, so I whispered back, "How can I turn you down when you ask so nicely?" Then, in a half-joking, half-serious voice, I added, "But make it quick." I grabbed the back of his head and pulled him down for a kiss. Ben kissed me differently than he had ever kissed me before, and then he made love to me differently than he had ever made love to me before. He was full of passion, like usual, but I also felt a need in him I'd never sensed before. He loved sex, and we had it often. He was usually quick and to the point, but now he took his time. His eyes never left me, and he never said a word. The look in his eyes and the way he touched me told me everything I needed to know. Afterward, we held each other for a little while before he got up and went into the bathroom to get dressed again. I heard noises in the bathroom that sounded like sobbing. Ben had never cried, ever. But knowing we were going to be late, I vowed we would talk about his strange behavior when we came home that night. The ominous glow of the headlights shone through the rain. I sat in his BMW and glanced over at him. Ben hated listening to top 40 music, but he turned the radio station to 102.7 for me anyway, which made me smile. We were listening to Gavin DeGraw's "I'm in Love with a Girl." I was singing along to the lyrics and was surprised when I saw Ben singing the words as well. Sensing me watching him, he turned, quickly looked at me, and stopped singing. "If I ever wrote a song, this is the one I'd have written about you," he said. Then he turned the radio up louder, and the lump that I had in my throat earlier returned. We had been together so long that sometimes I lost sight of what I loved about him. At this moment, I knew it was just everything. The way he carried his 6-foot frame, his short, dirty blonde hair, his dimples, and the way he commanded attention from everyone with his confidence. Sometimes it seemed to border on arrogance, but it only made people notice him more. Growing up, he was all surfer, and as an adult, he still was. I smiled thinking that as a kid he had such a bad mouth, was hot-headed,